Well, hello again there, kids. This is your next edition of Mr. McDermott's video podcast. This time we're going to be talking about imperialism, so pay attention. Before we start, though, think about it. What else does the United States own besides the 50 states? Let's think about it. Okay. Oh, time's up. How about things like Puerto Rico? Are you thinking about that? Um, any other colonies we have around, like Guam, perhaps? Pacific Ocean, somewhere in the Caribbean. Um, some people wonder if Puerto Rico is going to ever be a 51st state. No, sorry, by the way, we do not own Canada. It's its own country. But the time period that we started owning more and more colonies, and we used to have a lot more, starts right around the turn of the century with imperialism. So, and one more thing before we start is how many wars can you name? I would hope that last year you could think of from 8th grade the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 and the Civil War. What's after the Civil War? Actually, before the Civil War, the Mexican-American War in the 1840s. But what about after the Civil War? What do we have? Might be thinking World War I. No. How about 1898, the Spanish-American War? Something you may not even have known about at all. So, and that's the point. We need to learn about the Spanish-American War, which is a big part of this imperialism unit. We fought a war and we gained a bunch of territories. So this is called U.S. Looks Overseas. It's section 1 in chapter 12. Here's Uncle Sam carving up the world. This pretty much sums up all of imperialism, that he's putting that U.S. flag all over. You know, like, wait, why do we have Hawaii as a state again? It's so far away. That doesn't make sense. I mean, the same thing with Alaska. This is the time period that all starts to happen. And Uncle Sam's saying, by gum, I rather like your looks. So make sure you write this stuff down. It says imperialism, the economic and political domination of a strong nation over other weaker nations. Economic and political. There's two parts to that. So make sure you pay attention. Now, economic, what does that mean? Economic, the word economy, money, right? It's economic that way. But political domination, that means politics, politicians, government. So we take over a colony with their economy, and we also take over their government. That's what imperialism is. So many European countries are already taking over weaker countries, weaker nations, and eventually we're going to want to play catch up and be like our buddies over there in Europe. Now, we used to prefer to isolate ourselves. We used to think that was the way to go in the 1860s, 1880s, because we had everything we needed here. We had all the resources. We talked about natural resources. We could produce pretty much everything we needed. That's known as isolationism. I hope you can see the word isolate in there. We isolated ourselves. This would go on and off over our history, whether we'd want to isolate or not, or get more involved. But at that point we were. But this is going to change because people of America wanted to grow because the economic and military competition from other countries we want to keep up. And secondly, a growing feeling in America around the turn of the century of cultural superiority. Can you think of what that means? Cultural superiority. So we thought our culture as Americans, as white men, was superior to that of other races. We thought we were, I guess, more worthy. So we'll talk more about it. But European countries began expanding around the world. They take over, I said this just a second ago, into especially Asia, like so, and then Africa. It got pretty ugly. It was actually by the height of it, it was pretty hard to find any territories left to take in Africa or Asia, at least anyway that were worth having, like with natural resources. So they're going in, their armies are invading and their navies are invading, and they're taking over and they're forcing the people, not really to be slaves, but to work for them. And it wasn't pretty. Those people, I'm sure, did not enjoy that at all. That's why a lot of countries in Africa speak French or Portuguese or Spanish or, you name it, or Dutch. And we're thinking, hey, this looks good. They're making money off of this. Maybe we should try this too. So, after all, we're Americans. We don't want to be left out. And that goes along with what I mentioned before, this feeling of American cultural superiority. We thought we better spread our superior culture around the world so that everyone in the world could be like us. That's what some people viewed. Other people just cared more about the money and the business and the jobs that would be created by selling stuff to these territories. But some people went the cultural superiority route. Now, I want to really mention this word ethnocentrism that's here. Really important. Ethnocentrism. I don't know if you've ever heard the word. There's a good chance you have not heard the word before. But what does that mean? Now, you see the word ethnic in here, like what's your ethnicity? You know, what kind of country or ethnic group have you come from? Versus in the word centrism, like centered around. So someone who is ethnocentric is their thinking, the way they think is very centered on their own ethnicity. They think their ethnicity is the best. For example, you might hear about some other culture in history class and you're like, oh, that's stupid. Why do they do that? Well, that statement you just made is ethnocentric. Here's an example. That's different. Have you ever seen this before? Yeah, that's kind of strange. What's up with this, right? Some Asian cultures do the neck stretching thing. I don't know too much about it, but it's a cultural thing. Like, oh, that's weird. Well, guess what? In their culture, that serves a purpose. Maybe it's desirable. I don't know the whole story. Is it a religious practice? I'm not sure, but there's a reason they do that, right? And like, oh, that's horrible. Why would they do that? Ew. Well, I don't know. Maybe they think that's really cool. Maybe they think it's really attractive. I don't know. But here's another example. Maybe you've seen this. Hey, I got that done at the boardwalk when I was at the beach. That's pretty cool. But look, we're not really ones to speak. Think about it. Think about all the people in our society that get all these crazy tattoos, like neck tattoos or anywhere on their body. Isn't that kind of weird to think about to draw ink on ourselves that's permanently going to be there? And we think we're great, but what about us obsessing with how pretty our teeth are, how straight and white our teeth are? That's kind of weird. If you're an alien from outer space, you're going to think that's really strange that those Americans are focused on that. And girls putting hot metal irons on their hair because it looks nice, or putting holes in our body. Hey, we're no different than this guy, right? Putting piercings or what about us dyeing our hair certain colors? That's really no different than what we're seeing in front of us. So if you think that those people are weird, you're being ethnocentric, and I'm going to encourage you to not think that way. Because after all, that's pretty odd. So yeah, we're no better. And after all, for one more example, our buddy Snooky, you may remember her. She's not exactly something that proves Americans are number one. We're number one. Go USA. So anyway, back to imperialism, shall we? Manifest Destiny. Remember this from last year in 8th grade? Your teachers are watching, okay? Do you remember what was this story all about? Remember how in the early 1800s, the Americans thought we had the right to invade from sea to shining sea. But oh no, we went from sea to shining sea. Now what do? Well, we're going to see if we can do some trading with our friends in Japan. We're going to go pay them a visit. So, this man, Matthew C. Perry, no relation to Matthew Perry from the show Friends from the 90s, but in 1853, this different Matthew C. Perry, a Commodore, took a trip with the U.S. Navy over to Japan and to say hello and to force them to trade with us. That's what we were concerned about. So there he is. There's his picture. He's going to head over and say, what's up, Japan? You feel like trading with us? Oh, by the way, Japan, did you notice our shiny cannons that are pointing right at your shores? Oh, yeah, maybe you saw those. Actually, it's basically going to intimidate them. The Japanese had been very isolationist for centuries, and they really were unaware of Western advances and technology. So here we come with our crazy ships. Look at the uniform he's wearing, right, with these little frilly things and the crazy. And plus, he was a little bit taller than the average Japanese Japanese resident. So they kind of thought, like, what is this white man doing with their ships and their guns, and what's all this going on? So we kind of intimidated them into having to trade with us, I should say. So the Japanese fear our technology and our weapons, and they realize we better not fight back, and that they need to modernize. So they do. They agree to it. But a fun fact, we're going to talk about this later with World War II, later in the year, but Japan really does catch on. It's a pretty amazing example of how quickly a country can modernize if they really, I guess, put their minds to it. They changed their backward ways. By World War II, 90 years after this little encounter, Japan's going to end up having one of the world's most powerful navies and best technology. And at the beginning of World War II, they arguably had a more powerful navy and better fighting planes than the U.S. did. So it's actually pretty amazing how quickly things changed. But anyways, another example of imperialism is Alaska. You want to ask yourself, how did we acquire Alaska? What's up with that? Seems like it should be part of Canada. Well, Alaska had been a Russian colony. Now, I guess Russia at this point wanted to sell Alaska, thought it was kind of useless. I don't know, maybe they were going through a tough financial time and they wanted to make extra cash. I'm not really sure the whole story. But we decided, okay, we'll buy it. We can use it as a refueling station on the way to Asia. Meanwhile, people are thinking to themselves, what are you talking about? We're going to spend millions of dollars on this chunk of ice? People made fun of Seward, the Secretary of State, the President's Secretary of State who was in charge of this. His last name was Seward. They nicknamed Alaska Seward's Icebox, or Seward's Folly, or Andrew Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. Okay, I actually made that last name up, but whatever. But little did they know that gold would be discovered in Alaska in 1896, and not to mention silver and all other kinds of valuable things. And of course, what else do we know comes from Alaska nowadays? Oil. Hello. So that's pretty useful. So I guess it ended up paying off, huh? Moving along, another territory. How about beautiful Hawaii? This is a picture from my vacation. There I am right there. Just kidding. No, I've never been to Hawaii yet. Ooh, a beautiful rainbow. Well, Hawaii was useful for sailors for decades or hundreds of years, I guess. It had been a stopping point for sailors since the early 1800s along the way, refueling, get resources you needed. And once Americans figured out you could grow sugarcane there very well, then wow, we want it because you can make a ton of money. Our businessmen wanted to get richer there. It takes a very certain climate to grow sugarcane, which is a pretty nasty process from what I understand. So the only problem is Hawaii was a kingdom, and at the time the leader was Queen. Ooh, you guys want to try to pronounce this on your own? That'll be fun. Queen. How about Queen Liliuokalani? Say it yourself, kids. It's fun. Queen Liliuokalani, leader of Hawaii. Of course, she doesn't want to give up her country. The white businessmen formed a little violent takeover, a coup, and organize an uprising, they'll call it. And the president did not sanction this, but 50 U.S. Marines, kind of on their own, decided it was good idea to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani and set up a pro-American government. So when the president found out about this, he was pretty upset. But, I mean, what are you going to do? We already overthrew her. And eventually, years later, they're going to annex Hawaii. But it took a while to convince people that this was a good idea. It doesn't make sense. Hawaii's so far away, but eventually Congress was convinced. By the way, annex, hello, vocab, when a powerful country takes a chunk of land and makes it part of their territory. This is my own words, in case you couldn't tell. Lastly, China. China was weak after some fighting from within the country. Strong European countries and Japan had forced China to give them up their land within China and the trading rights to the land. So this is known as spheres of influence. And I'll show you a map so this makes sense to you. But they divided China, like European countries and Japan, who was stronger by this time, divided China into spheres of influence, which is areas where another nation has economic and political control. So for example, if this is our map of China, what I'm telling you is the old way that the countries were doing this was, maybe Japan would take over this part. And by the way, this is just me making this up. This isn't like, I don't know geographically if this is the exact spots or anything, but just for a visual, maybe France would kind of take control of this part of China for trading purposes, and England would take part of that part of China for trading purposes, etc., etc. But you notice there's a country missing, right? The United States is not involved, and we want to play with our friends as well and make money. So we declare an open door policy. We request and convince the other countries to do open door, which means all countries can trade with China equally. And this is what we know nowadays is just common sense, right? We want to trade with a country? Okay, go ahead, trade with a country, and France can trade with that country, and England, it doesn't matter, right? This is what we do now. But we convince the other countries to give up the spheres of influence so that we could have a say. And listen, that's all we have for you for this podcast. Make sure you fill out all the notes, and don't forget to take your quiz right now on Blackboard to prove that you watched it. We'll see you next time, kids.